Okay, so this is revision 2023 economics quickfire. Right, so we start off here and we do fiscal policy, monetary policy, supply side policy. Just some quick figures. The budget deficit in 2020 was 14.6%. In 2021, it was 5.1%. And 2022, it was 6.1%. So this is therefore creating a very large national debt of 100% of GDP in 2023. In 2007, before the financial crash, the national debt was roughly about 40% of GDP. Fiscal policy is government spending and taxation. Then we start talking about Keynesian economics, and in Keynesian economics, if there is a recession, then you increase G. This will set off the multiplier accelerator because you've got a large negative output gap. Always say that. So all the way down here. This is the diagram that I would always draw at this moment in time. A large negative output gap. So if we do increase AD, we're not going to get demand pull inflation. Obviously, the closer we get towards full capacity in the economy, then we're more likely to get demand pull inflation. In 2009 and 2020, this was a perfect time to do this because we had large negative output gaps. And also, then we kick off the multiplier accelerator interaction because they both interact off each other. The key point here is that by getting that extra growth, according to Keynes, by shifting from here to here, that would then increase the taxation revenues, which would then pay off the initial deficit. Okay, this is going to be a long video, this one. Next up, in 2020, obviously, as I've just said, we had very large negative output gaps, so the government really opened its chequebook, an extra £170 billion for the NHS. We increased in G on furlough. Overall, the Bank of England sort of printed through modern monetary financing 450 billion quid. So this was an extra stimulus. Yes, the policy worked. So this is sort of part of monetary policy, but the government was actually spending the money. So is it really fiscal policy as well? Yes, the policy worked, even though the UK took a deep hit of a fall in GDP of minus 19.6%. That is massive. During the financial crash, the GDP fell by 6.8%. In 2020, although it's hard to remember, we almost had deflation. So at that stage, if it's bad deflation, which we did have because it was caused by a fall of AD, a lack of aggregate demand, that meant that prices were very low and inflation was at 1%. Now inflation is at 10%, and there are all sorts of reasons why that has occurred. Next up, always write in context. So always remember that period, 2009, 2011, we did increase G then, but that was a typical Keynesian response. And between 2011 and 2019, if you remember, we had the period of austerity where we had falling budget deficits all the time. Okay, the national debt was still going up every year, but every single year with falling budget deficits. Was this the right move? Or should we have been spending more money? Because at that stage, we could have borrowed money at 2% and investing in the National Health Service, creating a green revolution or whatever. So this is writing in context. So these are critical dates that you need to remember. In 2022, we have the Liz Truss free market view, which is all about decreasing direct taxes. And we all know that the lettist outlived her premiership during that period of time. But that is the free market view. And the idea was to stop managed decline. Growth. At this stage, I would always talk about they really wanted to lower corporation tax. Okay? Because in 2023, Rishi Sunak's main objective now is to stop inflation because it's now at 10.1%. So therefore, we've actually increased the taxes during this period of time. What they've done is they freeze the tax threshold. This is really important. So because people are now getting large pay increases because we've got an inflation rate of 10%, so teachers might get 6% this year, nurses might get 6%. That is pushing more and more people into the higher tax bands. So there's now 6 million people who pay the 40% tax band because there's more and more people moving into that tax band. He's also said that he will introduce increased corporation tax from 19 to 25%, which is reversing what Liz Truss did. And this is anti the Laffer curve. Okay, so this goes against the idea of the Laffer curve. Okay, the Laffer curve that I would always draw, if you go right back to the start of the course, that's when we did the Laffer curve. Now, if we increase corporation tax from 25%, this is what I would say. If it happens to be, we don't know what the place is. We wish we did. But if it happens to be that the magic number is 12.5%, and that is where you maximize your taxation revenue. If we increase the taxation rate from 19% to 25%, then that is going to lead to a lowering of the tax revenue levels that we then get. Remember, you've always then got to draw the Laffer curve, not like this. You've got to draw it more like that. Okay? Right. Okay, so, and a good example of this is Ireland has got a 12.5% tax rate. They have achieved a very high growth rate of plus 10%. Okay, so right now the tax burden is actually going up because we've got corporation tax of 19 to 25%. We've frozen tax thresholds. There's windfall taxes on the oil companies. The main objective is to decrease inflation and decrease the national debt. But how realistic is that? Right, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. But at the same time, we've got rising inequality. We've got a worsening cost of living crisis. 20% of the population is now in poverty. AD may well fall from there. Please remember this, though. The government has pledged over the next 5 years £600 billion stimulus, and they're going to spend that money on education, health, infrastructure, skills, and innovation. So the government is going to be spending a lot more money. So this isn't really like a traditional conservative response to these issues. Tax thresholds. Not that you need to learn all of these, but they're quite easy to remember, really. So we earn the first £12,500 tax-free. Up to £15,000, you earn 20%, you pay at 20%, and between 150 and 120,000, you pay at 40%, and 120,000 plus is at 45%. Remember, when Liz Truss came along, she wanted to decrease the top rate of tax, which caused an absolute outroar in the country because there's a cost of living crisis, and she's giving more money to the rich with the idea that you would increase enterprise. Right, so 6 million people now pay tax at 40%. Over the next 5 years, just remember this again, we've already done it, we're going to spend £600 billion. That is like a bit of a traditional Keynesian response on sorting out education, skills, NHS and infrastructure. Okay, to put that into context though, China has spent £400 billion just on the solar panel industry. But okay, China's a bigger country than the UK, but they put massive government stimulus into their key sectors. So what about a green revolution? If you decide to put loads of money into your industrial sectors, then this is part of industrial policy, which is part of intervention supply side. And you can have a policy like this, e.g. the Green Revolution. Or we could create a British national energy company, which is then nationalised. Okay. Problems of national debt. Number one is the crowding out effect. The idea is you're taking money away from the private sector. Remember the starting line on here. The government has to sell bonds. By selling bonds, people will then buy their bonds. They will give their money over to the government, and that will mean that they won't buy shares or put money into the banks. And that is the reason why you're taking money away from the private sector. It also means we have rising taxes in the future. E.g., right now we've got rising taxes. And the reason we have rising taxes is because we kept the same thresholds. There's going to be a lack of confidence in the UK economy if we have really, really high national debt. Right, this year we're going to be spending a whopping £116 billion just on interest payments. But remember, those interest payments tend to go back to people within the UK. We may even lose our credit rating, so it may cost us even more money to borrow money, and all of that. Remember, though, that we've also got problems with a budget surplus, because if you have a budget surplus, that means you are taking your taxation revenues greater than your government spending, and you're taking demand out of the economy. Right. Okay, so this is still fiscal policy on here. Okay, UK economy, key stats. Well, I think the biggest stat they want to know is the inflation rate is 10.1%. Incomes are rising at 5%, or roughly, wage growth is rising 6.6%. So therefore, everyone is getting poorer to the tune of 3.4%. Therefore, that may have an effect on consumption. Particularly, food inflation is at over 19%. This is leading to a rise in inequality. And then you can quote all the figures that we have rising inequality in the UK. UK is something like 0.35, America's 0.42. Right now, most of the inflation is mainly caused by cost push, and that's by the rise in the oil and gas price. But perhaps also we've been printing too much money, and then we go back to this idea of MV equals PT, and And they believe that if there's an increase in money supply, the money believe there's an increase in money supply, that will lead to an increase in inflation because M goes up, V is stable, and T is also stable. So this then creates inflationary expectations, which are rising at 5.4%. If we have wage growth is rising, cost push inflation, and we have inflationary expectations, that will then create inflation. Now, that is why Rishi Sunak doesn't want to give pay increases, large pay increases to the public sector, because he wants to keep inflationary expectations down. In the past, with inflation always at roughly 2%, we are therefore quite happy to have a wage rise of 2%, because that means we're not getting any poorer. But right now, with inflation of over 10%, that is why wage growth is taking off. And as wage growth takes off, then that will also cause inflation. Remember the diagram for cost push, that's AD, SRAS will move from there to there. Okay, so you always want to draw that in there. So this is one of the big issues of today. So our main objective right now is, the main objective of Rishi Sunak is that he wants to get hold of inflation. Okay, key figures again. Budget deficit, 14.6%. 2022 is 6.1%. And 2023 it was 5.6%. If we can remember about the budget deficits between 2000 and 2019, basically what happened was in 2010 it was roughly 10%, and then we got it all the way down to 3%. Now that is what the Conservative Party did, but during the whole of this time, obviously, even with falling budget deficits, the national debt was still going up every single year, even between 2011 and 2019. So right now we have VAT at 20%. We're going to raise corporation tax from 19 to 25%. The Gini coefficient is pretty high in the UK, 0.345. In Finland, remember, it's only 0.27. So fiscal policy, please remember the tax burden is actually going up now because they've frozen the tax thresholds. But once again, we have this increase in GBIT with £600 billion coming in, skills, innovation, infrastructure, education and growth. And we also have a current account deficit of 3.3%. We are tending to save much more than we did in the past, so the savings ratio has gone up. That will also obviously therefore decrease consumption. Business and consumer confidence is at an all-time low, so therefore there's no animal spirits within the UK economy. Remember what animal spirits is? Animal spirits is when people feel confident, so therefore there's going to be more investment. Okay, so watch the video on supply side economics. We have free market economics and interventionist economics, which is a bit like with the industrial policy. So we all know the diagram, label it all up obviously. We can increase money in the green revolution. Free market is all about free trade, low corporation tax, low income tax, 0-hour contracts, reducing the power of the trade unions. The whole idea, therefore, is that increases the underlying trend rate of growth. Now, if you reduce the underlying trend rate of growth, that will obviously reduce demand pull inflation. It will also reduce cost push inflation because we also become more efficient. Always think at this stage, I'm trying to drum it into you, think corporation tax. If you reduce corporation tax, that means more investment. More investment means that firms becomes more efficient, therefore they will reduce their costs. They'll also increase AS, and if we increase AS, we can then increase exports. Right, if we increase exports, that will solve the balance of payments problem. That'll also create economic growth because it pushes out the AS curve. That's the key things that you want to do in an economy. That will increase the underlying trend rate of growth or the trend rate of growth. Decrease unemployment, once again, increase the underlying trend rate of growth. Free market policies, labour market flexibility. So that will also reduce unemployment. Remember the natural rate of unemployment. And it will also improve the trade balance. Think corporation tax again. So corporation tax, low corporation tax, more investment, more efficiency, more exports, greater underlying trend rate of growth, less demand pull inflation. Okay. So remember, supply side economics can solve all of your problems. And that's why in an examination, it's one of the more favourite policies to always talk about. Okay, slide 10 on here. So how do you reduce unemployment? Number one, you reduce the natural rate of unemployment. I'm hopefully going to be talking about that in a second. So more labour market. Remember, the natural unemployment is structural unemployment, frictional unemployment, and also real wage unemployment. Okay, it's all about labour market flexibility. It's all about reducing the power of the trade unions, reducing the minimum wage, reducing trade unions, zero-hour contracts, reducing the income tax. All of that will reduce the natural rate. Okay, so we get, structural unemployment, frictional unemployment, real wage unemployment. Right, it's all about reducing the natural rate of unemployment. However, if we want to reduce cyclical unemployment, which remember is involuntary unemployment, we had this during 2008 and 2009, so therefore we had to increase AD. Voluntary unemployment is all about using free market supply side economics, free market supply side economics over here. Or remember, we can also have an intervention supply side policy where we're once again increasing the productive capacity of the economy. Energy is really important. Cheap energy would make all the difference. Then we can run our economy at high levels of demand, and so we will be in. Next up, are we below the natural rate of unemployment right now in the UK? Remember, the natural rate of unemployment we think is between 4 and 5%. The UK unemployment rate right now is 3.8%. So it's almost that we're probably below that level. So therefore, we're more likely to get wage push inflation. Remember, wage push inflation right now is running at 6.6%. This adds to inflationary expectations. This is what we call a tight labour market. Okay, so that will increase cost push inflation because expectations are at 5%. Wages are rising at 6.6%. Food inflation is at 19.1%. We're also below the natural rate of unemployment. And also the over 50s are leaving the labour market. Because they're leaving the labour market, maybe because of COVID, that's also reducing the underlying trend rate of growth. Okay, so I thought then I'll talk about MV equals PT. Right, well, during the financial crash, we used QE, which is 360 billion quid. During COVID, we used modern monetary financing, which is 450 billion pounds. Therefore, the basic belief is if the money supply goes up by 10%, we will get an inflation rate of 10%. Okay, so too much money chasing too few goods. If M goes up, then P goes up because V and T are stable. Remember, V is the velocity of circulation, T is transactions. Right, and then we use this diagram on here. So we say if AD goes up from here to here, we move from A to B to C. So what happens is in the short run, unemployment falls. As unemployment falls, labour market tightens. Therefore, they ask for higher wages. So therefore, we move from there to there. And that explains why you do not want to let the money supply get out of control. But this is their belief. This is a monetarist belief. Okay. The criticism is that there's not always a clear relationship between those two variables with MV equals PT. Right. That's number 12. Number 13 on here. Effects of inflation and deflation. Okay. So if you get a question on this, which is worse, inflation or deflation, or what is the danger of it, you don't go through what causes inflation. We all know that, cost push, demand pull, MV equals PT. What we talk about is the effects of inflation. The effects of inflation, it creates a cost of living crisis. That could then cause a fall in demand because inflation is going at 10%. If your wages are only going up by 6.6%, overall on average, that's going to create a fall in demand. It also creates a rise in inequality, which is another problem. Rising interest rates, right? Obviously right now, rising inflation, rising interest rates. Therefore, that creates a rising exchange rate, etc. Your mortgages become more expensive, so therefore people have less money to spend. Savers lose, borrowers gain. Okay, the only people who gain will be the people who borrow money, but savers will lose money. You lose international competitiveness because if your rate of inflation is 10%, Germany's is 2%, we become less competitive, and inflationary expectations can take hold. Therefore, we expect high inflation. That also then creates a problem. Deflation, right. Just remember, we have two types of deflation. We have bad deflation, good deflation. Bad deflation, which is also called malign deflation, is caused by a lack of AD. Good deflation, which is caused by the AS curve going out. Obviously, caused by a rise in productivity. Obviously, we always want good deflation because that's caused by goods becoming cheaper due to productivity improvements. Okay, so now why do people stop spending money? Because prices keep on falling, then that's going to create another fall in demand. Borrowers will lose money because money becomes worth more. And in the UK, we hold 400% of our money is 40% of our, over 400% of our GDP, the equivalent to 4 times our GDP is held in personal debt. Remember, the national debt is 100% of GDP. So if money becomes worth more, that means that borrowers have a real problem. We lose power over interest rates because even if interest rates are 0%, and if there's inflation, if there's deflation of -2%, that means if you put your money in the bank, it becomes worth more, even though you're not getting any interest on that money. So it still pays to save. So all of these stop spending, all these factors stop spending. So this is not good. Deflation is also very dangerous. Right. Okay, how do you get out of deflation? Well, you can just print money to increase demand, or you lower interest rates. Okay, or you can increase G, fiscal policy, or you can use modern monetary financing. So interest rates, just broadly speaking, you should roughly know this. Right, between 2008, they were 5.75%. Then the financial crash came along. So between 2009 and 2021, interest rates roughly 0.5%. Okay, at times they got down to 0.25 and 0.1%, but roughly they were always 0.5%. In 2023, right now, they're 4.5%. So we've also QE, modern monetary financing and low interest rates. So the criticism of all of these things is it's created an asset price bubble. So that's created more inequality within the UK economy. And also maybe all this printing of the money bit has led to a rise in M, and we've just done NV equals PT. So has monetary policy been effective over the years? I think really your probably conclusion is yes, it has been, because we had to increase AD. But between 2009, we used QE, we saved the economy, but also saved the banks, because it gave the banks more cash because we bought their bonds. Then this creates a problem of moral hazard. Did they deserve to be saved because they helped to create the financial crash? However, it also created inequality and an asset price bubble. In 2020 to 2021, we got modern monetary financing. We use this because we had a massive recession, 19.6% due to COVID. Now, was that the right move? I think at the time, most people would say, well, that's what we had to do. We had to keep the economy going. So, but this has now maybe created problems via MV equals PT and created an asset price bubble. Because remember, all of this money wasn't shoveled into capital investment like an industrial policy, like a green revolution, spending money on the NHS. It was spent into furlough and things and money that didn't create something which came out of it. Okay, but it did get us out of COVID during that period of time. Danny Banchflower. Okay, so right now we've got this big problem. Interest rates 4.5%. Danny Banchflower, as an ex-member of the MPC, says the interest rate is now too high. Okay, so now at 4.5%, and this could cause a recession because that will cause a fall in demand. And if there's a rise in recession, that leads to a decrease in tax revenues, and it's a really, really bad thing to do. And he says inflation will fall anyway, because eventually the oil and gas price will come down. Eventually food prices will eventually fall. Now, you could argue against this because remember, unemployment is less than the natural rate of unemployment. That might also cause inflation. Okay, the European Central Bank, quite interesting to know right now, is engaged in quantitative tightening. So this is when they sell bonds and they take money out of the system. Okay, but just remember the basics of the transmission mechanism. If you increase interest rates, that leads to a fall in consumption, a fall in investment, a fall in house prices because it's more expensive to money, and it will also have an exchange rate effect because hot money should come into the UK and the exchange rate should normally go up from there, and then it becomes harder to sell our exports, etc. Okay, on to slide 16. So if we increase interest rates, remember this, hot money will come into the UK. Remember, this is not investment. This is not FDI. This is hot money that just comes to our banks very, very quickly. And therefore, that will make the exchange rate go up. So if you can remember the transmission mechanism, there are four things that occur. It becomes more expensive to borrow money. It becomes, so therefore, consumption goes down, investment goes down, house prices go down. Right, we will also get a rise in the exchange rate. That'll mean higher export prices, lower import prices. Lower import prices will actually reduce cost push inflation, so the rate of inflation will fall from here to here. So there's quite a good bit of economics that we can get across here. Don't forget these two diagrams on here. Right, next up, 3 easy diagrams for inflation. Demand pull. Here we've got a positive output gap. It's a similar diagram to this one. Sorry, we've got 4 diagrams on here. Cost push inflation is like this. We got MV equals PT. We've just done this one. And if there's a fall in the exchange rate, that will lead to a rise in import prices. So therefore, inflation will also go up. Right, so that's 4 diagrams, but we've got 2 diagrams for one, as it were. Okay, move over the page. Economic growth. Key advantages of economic growth. You should all know this now. Remember, economic growth is all indicated because there's more taxation revenue. It pays off the national debt. It creates more taxation revenue, so we have the Green Revolution. We've got more taxation revenue, more money for public and merit goods. It will self-multiply, accelerate interaction. It releases the animal spirits within the UK because we have more confidence, so therefore people invest more money. But this creates demand pull inflation, also creates a trade deficit, and also worsens the environment. Oh, crikey, I'm doing this at 5:30 in the morning. I'm getting a little bit tired now. Okay, so this is economic growth on here, but problems with demand pool, trade deficit, and more problems for the environment on there. Number 19, we move on to the economic cycle and the Office for Budget Responsibility. If you want to draw a diagram of the economic cycle, this slope here shows the trend rate of growth. This bit here shows positive output gap, negative output gap, recession here, growth here, obviously, boom period, recession, etc. So we should also put boom in here, boom, and recession here. Okay, so this is just showing the economic cycle on there. We also have a thing called the Office for Budget Responsibility. Right, the Office for Budget Responsibility looks at the state of the national finances. Now, an interesting report came out. They believed that because of Brexit, this knocked off 4% off the UK's productive potential. So in a sense, it would have decreased this here. It would have shifted the AS curve inwards. Jagdeep Chaudhry from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, he believes it's taken 5.5% off the AS curve. So this is serious. This is serious stuff. And also, it's also been caused by the over 50s leaving the labour market. Okay, so this is an overview on here. The overview is, we've done monetary policy, is demand side. It's always demand side policy. Remember, fiscal policy is demand and supply side. Interventions and free market. Think about it. Supply side policy solves all of your problems. We also, if you talk about the natural rate of unemployment here, free market and interventionist, right, increasing G is part of the industrial policy. Done. I reckon that's about 17 minutes.